there, welcome to our next talk in the history of World War II. So today we're looking at the Shoah, or the Holocaust, the Shoah being Hebrew word for the disaster. And what I want you to get out of today's talk is less the machinations of the death camps, which are widely known, and most of us have seen movies like Schindler's List and others, and we can intuit how the process happens. We will look at that to some extent, but I really want to give the backstory of the Holocaust. How and why could this have happened? And that's the big question that historians grapple with and have since the end of the war, when the camps were liberated and these shocking images went around the world. Okay, so nothing to it but to do it. Let's get started. Now, keeping with our theme of bottom-up history, or starting our talks that way, I want to give you this one story, okay, of a young Jewish girl. Her name is Anneliese. She was born in 1929 in Frankfurt, Germany. Now, she's the second daughter to Edith and Otto, who are both Reform Jews. Which means they've given up most of the traditions of the Jewish faith. They don't practice. Now, her father Otto, like most German men of his time, had fought in World War I, so he's a veteran. Unlike most, he is awarded the Iron Cross for his actions. Then he goes on to work in the family bank after the war, which was not uncommon then. Banks owned by families. His father passed it on to his sons. And then 1930 hits, the Great Depression, and the bank collapses. However, Otto, entrepreneurial, he recovers and he takes over an industrial supply business that his wife's family had owned. And so basically, Anneliese lived in comfort. And she lives in this German neighborhood of non-Jewish and Jewish people. They're thoroughly assimilated. In fact, they're in a pretty fashionable part of Frankfurt, which is known as the Dichter Viertel, or the Poets' Quarter. Then things start to get dark when the Nazis win the election of 1933 and Hitler is appointed chancellor. Now, Otto is one of those who has the foresight to see what will happen, and he sends his family out of the country and then stays behind to sell his business and follows them. Now, unfortunately, they chose Holland as their destination. That's because his wife's Edith's mother was there in the town of Aachen. They end up getting a place in Amsterdam, along with many other Jewish refugees. So they're one small family among 300,000 who get out of Germany in this time. Anneliese is soon and quickly, right away, enrolled in a Montessori school, and she really loves it, and she excels, in fact, and she makes quite a few friends, and again lives in comfort. There's a picture of her in Zandvoort on the beach in the Netherlands in 1940. Her father started a new wholesaling business, so they're again fairly flush and doing well. Then, when she is 12, the Germans invade the Netherlands. And Anneliese finds out really quickly what persecution looks like. After the summer holidays, she is not allowed back to the Montessori school. She has to go to a new Jewish school only for Jews that just opened that September. And then more restrictions follow that. Pretty soon she has to wear a yellow star. She loses her bicycle. All Jews have to give up their bicycles. Then she's not allowed to be out after 8 p.m., curfew. She cannot visit the homes of her non-Jewish friends. And one of the worst things is she has to give up all her sports and hobbies. She'd been into rhythmic gymnastics, has to give that up. She loved ice skating during the winter months, has to give that up. And she was into table tennis with her friends, and can't do that anymore either. Now, Otto Frank tried to arrange for the family to emigrate to the United States, but too late. And that at that point was the only destination that seemed to him to be viable. But his visa application was never processed because the U.S. consulate in Rotterdam was destroyed by German bombing on the 14th of May 1940, and all the paperwork there was lost at that point. Now, on the 12th of June 1942, it's Anne's 13th birthday, and she gets a journal, or a dagboek as the Dutch call it, a daybook. And a few days later, right after that, the Nazis began deporting Jews from the Netherlands to camps in Poland. Anneliese's sister gets an order, a call-up, as would all of them. So understanding that, Otto and Edith, not wanting their daughter to go, or the rest of them shortly after, the four of them go into hiding. And they hide in the back part of Otto's new company in that building. Now, the office staff knew about this, and they helped them out. Another family ends up joining them. That's Herman van Pels, his wife, and their son Peter. And then 4 months later, one other person also joined them. So it's crowded. They're never allowed to go outside, and it could be dangerous because of the possibility of discovery or when the city is bombed. Now, Anne read here. That's how she kept her sanity. She learned quite a bit, and she writes in her Dagboek, which became a real friend to her. In 1945, she decided that she was going to write this into a novel that she's going to publish after the war, and she really expects liberation, because the family finally gets some good news when they hear on the BBC through the secret radio that had been smuggled into them from their helpers. She hears about the Allied landings in France, and so they're counting the days for their liberation. And then by August 1944, the Allies are on the border of the Netherlands. But 4th of August, the family is discovered in an SD, Nazi intel agency, in an SD raid. Now, how that happens is unclear. They're probably betrayed, and in Holland at the time, there are bounty hunters that are paid a standard rate per captured Jewish person that they hand in. In any case, it's that the story of that has never been discovered. But together with their helpers, Otto's 2 employees, and her family, she is arrested and interrogated. And then the next day they are locked up in the house of detention in Amsterdam. Then they're sent to Westerbork, a transit camp in the Netherlands. And then finally, a month later, deported to Auschwitz. That's on a train with 1,019 others. 550, as they arrive, are deemed unfit for labor, and they're immediately sent to the gas chambers. Anneliese sees this, in fact, becomes quite depressed by it, clearly, not surprisingly, and she's 15 at this point. Here, right away, her father, Otto, is sent to the men's camp, and Anneliese never sees him again. Now, Anneliese, at this point, too, is forced to strip naked, to be disinfected. Her head is unshaved, and her arm gets a tattoo. And then she finds out women here are being used as slave labor, and she's forced to haul rocks every day and also to rip up sod. Anyway, Edith, her mother, is watching her daughters slowly starve, so she gives up her food rations to them and stops eating. Her girls have scabies and end up in the medical barracks, and then suddenly the both of them get sent out of Auschwitz to Bergen-Belsen, a camp in Germany, without their mother. The reason for that is the Soviets are getting closer, the front line is shifting, so those who can still work are sent west. But this is late 1944, and Bergen-Belsen is becoming a chaotic dumping ground as the Allied armies advance on both sides, and more other camps are being closed, and those inmates are arriving. So the population jumped from 7,300 people in July 44 to 15,000 by the time Anneliese and Margot get here. Eventually, it'll be up to 60,000 for a camp that was designed initially to hold 10,000. So basically, it's extreme overcrowding, severe food shortages, and deadly diseases are rampant here. But the one bright light is, at this point, she reconnects with a couple of her old friends from other camps, these old friends from Amsterdam, who are in better shape and are quite shocked by what they see in Anneliese. She tells them she's going to write this book after the war, but at this point she has lice so bad that she ends up getting typhus from it, typhus from the lice. By this point she's given up her uniform for a sheet, and she's basically a walking skeleton. She dies in February 1945, just 2 months before the Nazis abandon the camp, at which point the Allies find 55,000 other walking skeletons here, which perhaps you've seen images. Amazingly, her dad, her father, Otto, had survived. And that's because he was left behind in the Auschwitz-Birkenau sick barracks when the camp was evacuated. And that was a month before his daughters died. Eventually, he returns to Amsterdam and he finds Anneliese's dagboek. After 2 years of trying, he has it published under the title Het Achterhuis. Het Achterhuis, or the back house, the annex, as it's sometimes called, also known as Anne Frank's diary. And today, more than 35 million copies have been made of that book in 70 languages. Now, Otto gets to see that before he dies in 1980 at the age of 91. By that point, he's created the Anne Frank Foundation, giving the proceeds to charity, and he's saved the home from demolition and turned it into a museum. Unfortunately, he also spends the rest of his life fighting legal battles against neo-Nazis who claim the book was a fraud, which is interesting because if you've read it, you'll see it's not a flattering portrayal of it's not romantic in any way, shape, or form. Now, interestingly, the Frank family is exactly representative of Jews in Amsterdam, in that 75% of those died before liberation. 1 in 4 made it back alive. In any case, that is the story of Anne Frank, and if you haven't, I encourage you to read her diary and to visit her museum, which is still operating in Amsterdam. Now, as tragic as the Frank story is, we know that they are 3 out of what are approximately 6 million people who died in the Holocaust. And so historians since 1945, and really everybody, have been trying to figure out how this could have happened and why this happened. And in that questioning, in that historiography, 2 answers have emerged, and they've become 2 sides of a debate that continues. And one of those is called intentionalism, intentionality. And this holds that the Holocaust was premeditated. Right? The historiography here centers on anti-Semitism and ideology, and that this was premeditated then and goes back to the early 1920s, to the origins of the party. Now, this matches with the themes that we read in Mein Kampf, but more directly with, and we'll get to that in a second, but the clearest document that attests to this idea of intentionality and this early thinking of Hitler to go down this road is this. This is an interview with journalist Joseph Hell that he claimed to have had in 1922 with Hitler in Munich, in which Hitler said, "My first and foremost task would be the annihilation of the Jews," and then he goes on to say why that was. So Hell is writing this. He doesn't commit this to paper at the time. He writes this in 1945, which is why historians and most thinking people agree that it's probably not verbatim, but he's coming from memory. On the other hand, it does match with the radical statements that Hitler is making at that time, right? But it is decades later that Hell records this. You might get a sense already the intentionality argument suffers from not a lot of documentation, and that's partly by design. Hitler designs his regime so that rather than giving direct orders, he puts people in competition with each other, and those who are the strongest and the most radical come up with the solutions that he then approves of. But the closest Hitler comes to predicting mass murder in Mein Kampf was this passage where he states that he regrets that 12 to 15,000 Hebrew corruptors of the people had not been gassed during World War I in 1914. Now, what's interesting is we have Himmler's personal annotated copy of Mein Kampf, which the Americans found as they invaded Germany and took his home. Himmler, again, being one of the main architects of the Holocaust. And in it, Himmler highlights numerous passages, and he wrote comments in the margins. And among the statements he underlined is this very passage. And his notes also include the ominous prediction, quote, "The possibility of racial purification is at hand." And the other side of the debate is the structuralism or functionalism argument. This simply boils down to the fact that average people can do great evil, and this explains the Holocaust. And now the main proponent of this is post-war philosopher Hannah Arendt. in her famous book Eichmann in Jerusalem. Now this is based on the 1963 trial of Adolf Eichmann, who had been responsible for the transportation logistics of all the Jews to the death camps. And from this trial, well, he's arrested by Mossad in South America, perhaps you know, in the early 1960s, taken to Jerusalem and put on trial. While watching that trial, Hannah Arendt, who's fascinated by what motivated him, she finds him to be a mid-level bureaucratic, very boring, banal guy, not the face of evil. And with this, she comes up with this idea based on observation alone of the banality of evil, that mid-level bureaucratic people, pencil pushers, can do great evil and can allow themselves denial when given orders to do these things. So the structures in place enable people to do great evil, and that explains the Holocaust. This is confirmed later in the Stanley Milgram experiment, which you probably know about, where most people, or a significant minority of people, are willing to administer a lethal shock to others behind a curtain if they're told if they're simply told to do it by someone in a position of power over them. The structuralism theses seems to be validated by the fact that an aspect of it is the fact that that the Germans very seldom, the Nazis very seldom utter the words appropriate to the actions being taken. It's all very cryptic and obtuse, and you see that in one thing in the Wannsee Protocol, which we'll talk about, which again I mentioned, and that is where these leading Nazis get together and decide on the transportation of Jews to the death camps. But they never mention that this is exactly what it is. Another great example of that, and there's several of these kind of documents, these are technical documents describing improvements that need to be made to the Shoah death vans. Now, the Shoah death vans were an early experiment in gassing people, initially the disabled, then Romani, then Jews in Chelmno, and about almost 100,000 by the time we get the switch, or the crematorium, the gas chambers in the main death camps in Poland. But in any case, you read these documents and it's really chilling, because it talks about the people are called the load, and the load can shift, and if it shifts to the front of the van when the lights go out, it causes a problem with the stability of the van. Also, you have to have the exact right loading, because the van needs to be driving while it's gassing these people to the burial ground, a mass burial, and you can't have too many, or it becomes or could tip possibly over rough ground, these kind of things, or that the load might break the light and cause issues. It's chilling, it's horrific, and it feeds into that structuralism thesis. The structure's in place, and you don't talk about the action being taken. That's why it can happen. People are commodified. Now, the problem with the structuralism thesis is it only goes so far. What's been proven since at least the late 1980s, and Christopher Browning here is really the first to start this historiographical debate about how much the average German knew, and the myth after the war is that the Wehrmacht, the police battalions, were really innocent, that they were not SS, okay, and so they're not responsible for the Holocaust. Now, what Browning finds in his deep dive into the diaries and the letters home and the photographs that these men took in Poland and on the Eastern Front, is that most of these guys were, well, one, they're ordinary Germans, and secondly, in their letters home, they run the gamut from celebrating what they're doing to breaking down and having nervous disorders because they can't handle the fact that they're exterminating people day after day. Either way, he also points to the fact that camaraderie with your fellow soldiers is what keeps, and your fellow conscripts is what keeps them going, is what has them do this and assent to doing this, even though they know it's wrong. Okay, or again, they're celebrating what they're doing and bragging about it and posting these brag photos to family back home. So clearly, ordinary people can do this. It's not just about these mid-level bureaucrats in the system It is people that know what they are doing. Okay? They're not turning their minds off. That's the important point here. That's begun by that begins this debate by Christopher Browning. Now, Browning had proved that most of the killers were ordinary Germans. Daniel Goldhagen takes it to the next level afterwards in saying that most Germans are killers. So most ordinary Germans are killers. Reverses it and makes this generalization. And he bases it on this idea that Germany, I mean, all of Europe was anti-Semitic, the French arguably even more so than the Germans prior to the war. But he says the Germans had a uniquely exterminationist type of anti-Semitism. Right? And he bases this on this idea that Germany always had the Sonderweg, a special path, this ideological, cultural ideas that go back to Luther in terms of being obedient, in terms of being bureaucratic, and all of that feeds into this unique anti-Semitism. Okay? Now, others found this ridiculous, and they point out that this is the kind of essentialism that the Nazis themselves had used against the Jews, and then there's also the added perception of bias because Goldhagen's own family died in the Holocaust. But in any case, fascinating debate, and it's one that is not over. Okay, so just to finish off there, what the Daniel Goldhagen Browning conversation did is it really shifted the talk from victim-perpetrator narrative to the ordinary German. Okay, and that's a really rich part of the conversation ever since on the Holocaust, how the ordinary German participated, what they knew. In any case, let's do a quick romp through a Coles Notes version of the history of anti-Semitism, super important for understanding and contextualizing, historicizing what happens in the 20th century. Okay, so very broad overview here. The Jews live in the Middle East in what's called the Holy Land, and they have since time immemorial, and eventually come under the Roman Empire. So they're under the aegis of the Romans, and under whom they are marginalized but given semi-autonomy. Okay? Now that lasts until the Jewish rebellions and specifically till 70 AD at Masada. Holdouts are up on this mountain at Masada, a great film from the 70s. If you want to watch it, you can get a sense of what happens there. Under Constantine, the Romans switched from persecuting Christians to persecuting Jews because Constantine first Christianity. Okay, now the Jews are on the out, but they're still allowed to keep their temples, and they have it arguably much better than they do under the Islamic Imperium, which becomes the next big force in the world and in this region where most of the Jews live. The Islamic Imperium, and there you see it up to the apex in 750, and the centuries that follow. The Muslims pushed all the way up to Tours, France, and later under the Ottoman Empire, all the way through Turkey and into the Balkans. Okay, so that's 1683 is their apex there. But in any case, under the Islamic Imperium, again, where most Jews resided, after the diaspora, what's called the diaspora, the expulsion from after Masada, they are given a choice in the Islamic Imperium to either convert or be killed. So pretty brutal choices. Later on, they're given a third option, which is dhimmi status. Okay, so that is the point at which the Islamic rulers realize it's probably more profitable, definitely more profitable, simply to allow them certain rights and responsibilities, namely paying this dhimmi tax. Okay, 10% of their wealth to the state. Okay. Now Muhammad had never really forgiven the Jews for not following his religion, for not praying to Mecca. They continued for continuing to pray to Jerusalem, not to Mecca, and in fact participated in the slaughter of Jews in the Middle East. So now they're a protected class under dhimmi status. Rights and restrictions: cannot build their temples higher than a mosque, are kept there. They cannot be voluble. They must wear a yellow sash, and the Christians must wear a red one. Okay, Christians are also in the dhimmi status. They are people of the book, so somewhat respected that way, but again, a form of persecution here and marginalization. Now, the Jews also make their way up to Europe, and really large numbers head towards Eastern Europe. Now, as we get into past the Dark Ages into the Middle Age, and as universities open up, and we start getting pre-modern Europe, counterintuitively, the persecution of the Jews increases, and partly they're blamed for the plagues that hit Europe as the World Wide Web is closed and these diseases come from China to Europe over the Silk Road, right? When the Mongols closed the Eurasian, close the World Wide Web, World Wide Web. Anyway, more information that we need, so yeah. For centuries, Jews are blamed for pretty much anything, and it's partly because they keep their community under persecution, right? And this isolation. Now, that isolation in the East is manifest in what's called the shtetl, which is the small Jewish community, which are pockets inside what becomes the Russian Empire, inside what is later Eastern Germany in the East. And yeah, here they become targets of these periodic pogroms, blamed for anything, any kind of crisis. If you've seen the movie Fiddler on the Roof, enough said there, you have a sense of what I'm talking about. In any case, in terms of Spain, too, we get the 700-year Reconquista against the Muslims, which definitively defines Muslims as the other and the enemy. The Moors are kicked out of Spain, but along with them, when they're gone, as soon as the Spain is Castile and Aragon unite into modern Spain under Ferdinand and Isabella, they also expel all the Jews. Now, at this point, they are given a choice whether to convert or be expelled. Okay? And the Marranos of Spain are those Jews who do convert, and they take on Christian identity and can assimilate and disappear. Okay, so that is more or less the broad overview of what happens in Europe up till Enlightenment. So yes, the next stage is the Enlightenment, and with that we get the French Revolution from Enlightenment thinkers, liberty, equality, fraternity, and with that too, this idea of the emancipation of the Jews, that they should regain citizenship. With that too, a lot of them filter back from the Ashkenazi Jews of Eastern Europe, where they've been expelled to, filter back to Western Europe and become integrated and assimilated and successful, like Heinrich Heine, the famous German poet, Meyer Rothschild, the banker, Friedrich Mendelssohn, the composer. And yeah, it's an interesting thing. The left side, left wing in politics is because the Jacobins, the left, the most enlightened, they sat on the left side in the assembly, okay? And they're in favor of the emancipation of Jews, equality, citizenship, and that spreads around to European states. So come early 19th century, it is de rigueur to be in favor of the emancipation of the Jews. So things are getting quite a bit better. Now, the Enlightenment leads to the origins of the secular state and of European nationalism. But with that, the 19th century also brings a whole new threat, which is discrimination of Jews based on racial ideas, rather than, as it had always been, based on their religion, the practice of Judaism. And a major factor in this is evolutionary theory. As where before Jews could assimilate if they converted, like the Marranos of Spain, now they are a separate race, and you can't get away from that. Evolutionary theory is profoundly a different way of thinking of humanity, because rather than humans as the ultimate design of an ultimate creator, as the crown of creation, as it is in Christian theology, they're really the result of this long process in which weak and useless traits fell away. Right? It's an animalistic way of thinking of humans, and since the Northern European, Darwin is very clear on this, is the apex species, is at the top. They clearly had won the evolutionary battle, and they are designed by nature to rule. They're the end point of evolution. Now, with that, you get a whole lot of social Darwinist ideas, Herbert Spencer among them, but also Franz Gall, and the idea of phrenology, where the closer the shape of your cranium is to the European average, the closer you are to perfection, all based on complete bunk. But it's also not a big extension now to say that, and Darwin again is clear on this, because if you look at the second half of his book on the origin of the species, it's about the protection of the race, right, for the betterment of the race. In any case, not a big extension to say that this progress could be reversed through miscegenation, through interbreeding with inferior races. And then we're interfering with nature. We also interfere with it by protecting the weak, the unfit, and those racially inferior. And civilization is a double-edged sword that way, because it halts the evolutionary progress and can bring us backwards down that ladder. So, and in the evolutionary struggle, those inferior races are supposed to disappear. So you get the eugenics movement, along with a growing racism across the board, and now it has this new scientific legitimacy to it. Now, the other thing that precedes this and later becomes concurrent with this really important idea of 19th century Europe of perfectionism of humanity, and that goes along with evolutionary theory quite nicely, along with all the isms of the 20th century, including Nazism and communism. Positivism, invented by Auguste Comte, really systematized by him, and he gives this progress of world history and says, just as the apparent mysteries of the natural world have now been solved, and they're not theological, right? Just as we figured out how the world works, and it's not through God or a deity, we can also, and we've controlled nature, and we know how to increasingly. We can also now explain human nature, okay, and perfect that as well. Okay? So take the metaphysical out of that, and we will also, just as we can perfect the natural world and improve it, we can improve and perfect mankind. So the perfectibility of mankind is a really important central core point in positivism, which becomes very influential in 19th century Europe. I mean, to the point that if you look at Europeans in 1900 and you compare that to the Western world in the year 2000, it's night and day. It's this idea that the future is bright and it's only getting better. And a lot of that confidence is based on this idea of eternal progress, both of the natural world but also of human beings and societies. That criminology is based on this, and Kant really founds sociology, this study of the perfection of human beings. Okay, super important, foundational ideal. And another big thinker and another idea that is important as well, less so, but very important for the Nazis, for sure, is Nietzschean existentialism, because same themes. This is the idea of a cultural renewal led by this Uberman, the Superman, right? And also this idea that Nietzsche had, that Christianity was this weak faith, that it's a slave religion that really brought Europeans down, right? So veneration of the ancient gods. Europeans were powerful in the pagan era when they had powerful gods and powerful ideas. Again, it's survival of the fittest. It's the same kind of ideal as social Darwinism, not completely, but adjacent. And yeah, so Christianity is slave morality, and power is good, right? What is good? All that heightens the feeling of power in man, the will to power itself. What is bad? All that is born of weakness. So real validation here of might makes right, from a very weak and sickly individual who's probably explains at a psychological level his obsession with this. In any case, also a very important idea, a precursor to 20th century. Now, everybody loves to talk about Nietzsche, and I will say you cannot draw a direct line from Nietzsche to Nazi ideology, okay? For a couple of reasons. One is that Nietzsche is not anti-Semitic; he abhors that. And secondly, he is not about German nationalism; he abhors that as well. But there's definitely enough here about the slave morality of the Jewish and Christian faith, and this idea of weakness and power, that there's a lot here for the Nazis to draw on. And in fact, Alfred Rosenberg is the chief ideologist of the Nazi Party. He uses and reinterprets Nietzsche's philosophy to fit National Socialist ideology, and compares the Nazi movement's political struggle to Nietzsche's intellectual defiance, despite Nietzsche's own rejections, very explicit, of German nationalism. Now, though we know that race is a social construct, there is nothing specific to blood between different races. It's also easy enough to spot physical differences between what we term races. And for Jews, though, not so much. And they represent a real problem for the 19th, 20th century social Darwinists because of that, because simply they look like Europeans. You can't focus on physical traits, and as much as the Nazis pretend you can. But it's easy enough to say that they lack the cultural traits that make Europeans great, that this is the sign of their pathology. And this takes us to the Bayreuth Circle, who most embody this. Definitely not phonetic spelling of that, the Bayreuth Circle. Now, this is a group of intellectuals who promote the idea of Germanic greatness and the corollary that Jews were inferior. Now, Richard Wagner is the epicenter of this group, the composer, and he's all about the veneration of the true German Volksgeist, the German spirit. And he has this quasi-religious devotion to German blood and German history. And his operas show that. They're full of Norse mythology and of Teutonic legends, Teutonic being the Roman word for one of the Celtic tribes in what today is Germany, and Teutonic mythology going back to the Teutonic Order of 1190, which was this military order in the Crusades that by the 19th century has this romantic aura to it. Now, Wagner believes that his contemporaries lacked the German Volksgeist, and it becomes very personal because one of his targets is Friedrich Mendelssohn. So he says he produces inferior music because he doesn't have this German Volksgeist. He's Jewish. So this circle takes shape in Wagner's later years, but mainly after his death in 1883. And one of those in the circle, a really influential individual, is Houston Stewart Chamberlain. He is Wagner's son-in-law. He marries Wagner's daughter, and he writes this very important text on the history of Europe that is just filled to the brim with anti-Semitism and false racial ideas. He says that the Jews were a product of Bedouins and Syrians, who are both clearly really bad apples. And this book goes to 24 editions, and thousands of, I'm not sure the publication number, but it's out there, and very influential. Becomes a textbook of sorts. Now, Ennedy makes some really outrageous claims other than the weird Bedouin Syrian one. And for example, he has to do something about Jesus. The Savior of the world cannot be Jewish, so the focus must be on the fact that he is killed by the Jews. So what he does is he makes up the notion that the area of Nazareth, where Joseph and Mary lived before going to Bethlehem and giving birth to Jesus, was this non-Jewish ethnic pocket of sorts. And so now Jesus then is mainly an Aryan. Now that term too is made up. And here we can credit another figure who's very influential among the Bayreuth Circle of superstars, this racist posse, and that is Arthur Gobineau of France. Now, in 1853, Gobineau writes this famous piece called, here it is, quote, "An Essay on the Inequality of Human Races." Tell us what you really think, Arthur. And yes, as the title kind of hints at, he's promoting the concept that portends what Darwin is working toward. More specifically, what Darwin will say, that the British and Norse, etc., are at the top of the heap. Gobineau invents this Aryan master race, and what he does is he wrongly turns a language family that came out of Central Asia into a racial family, the ancient Indo-Europeans who migrated to Europe, and says that they're this biological master race that are clearly superior to all other people. So all completely ridiculous. And in fact, you'll see this later in some comical ways. One point when a Jewish baby, Hesse Levinson, wins a contest as a model Aryan, and her picture is featured on the front cover of Nazi magazine in 1934. Look that up. You can only be a true Aryan when you are as thin as Goering, as handsome as Goebbels, and as blonde as Hitler. as the wartime joke went, which a great statement about how ridiculous this concept of Aryanism is when the leaders of the Nazi party do not reflect it. Any case, and a Jewish baby does. Any case, contemporaneous with Jews gaining civil rights, which we've talked about, and that begins with the right to vote in Prussia in 1812, and then finally the whole empire by 1871. You have this parallel group that is very influential in their day, and kind of this ideological incubator, if you will, for European racial nationalism. And they're promoting their ideas through this popular monthly journal called the Beirut Blätter. Now, this enjoyed a 60-year run from 1878 to 1938, has a significant reach, and in the words of a cultural critic of the time, who has no patience for the nonsense in here, he says, the Bayreuther Blätter may yet prove to be of no little cultural historical significance. The future cultural historian of Germany will be able to give authentic testimony of how strongly the Wagnerian intoxication raged among us. This is 1882. Also, later, early 20s, Hitler said, quote, the reason we perceive Richard Wagner as great is because he represented heroic folklore, Germanness in all his works. The heroic is the great. That is what our people long for. And here's a third quote. Now, this is Sir Ian Kershaw in his landmark biography of Hitler. And he says this, Hitler, the non-entity, the mediocrity, the failure, wanted to live like a Wagnerian hero. He wanted to become himself a new Wagner, the philosopher king, the genius, the supreme artist. In Hitler's mounting identity crisis following his rejection at the Academy of Arts, Wagner was for Hitler the artistic giant he had dreamed of becoming, but knew he could never emulate, the incarnation of the triumph of aesthetics and the supremacy of art. And now, the point from all that is there's a rich intellectual tradition of anti-Semitism well before Hitler comes on the scene. However, given all that, it's still not easy come the 1920s and 30s for Nazis to convince German people that the Jews are a big threat. And largely because, again, they're so well integrated. Some of them, yes, they follow Judaism, but a lot of Jews are Christians, a lot of them more agnostic, and all of them self-identify as German, just as Jews in France identify as French, or Jews in the Netherlands identify as Dutch. Karl Marx is a great example of this, not being part of the Jewish community, even though he's Jewish. In fact, he grew up Lutheran and then becomes an atheist, and even more, an anti-Semitic atheist who blames the Jews for their capitalistic ways, as you can see here. In other words, a program is really needed to make Germans see the Jews as the plague that they allegedly are, in spite of this tradition that I've described for you, to see them as the cause of all ills. And this program happens in stages. Now, one of the most important parts of that is the propaganda mill, the propaganda machine, which eclipses all of the stages. It's throughout the Nazi regime and before it. In 1923 already, the Nazis are publishing Der Stürmer, the Attacker, which is this terrible tabloid that's the paper of Julius Streicher, who's a despicable human being. The last, the one in the Nuremberg trials, the only one who shouts Heil Hitler and is still very faithful to him right up until he gets the noose at the end. In any case, that is effective for the working class. It's a weekly paper that anyone can access. And then you have Julius Streicher also, through his publishing house, Nazifying all the educational materials after the Nazis take power, and specifically the schools. Okay, so all educational materials are through Streicher's publishing house, and there's some great examples of the kind of material that German youth are subjected to. One of the best being the mushroom, the poisonous mushroom. The Jew is like that poisonous mushroom. You can't always tell, but there are tells. Okay, and one, as Eric or whoever here is finding out, is the shape of his nose. Another is how he tries to, assimilate by going to church, but he's not fooling anyone, right? In any case, this is another part of the propaganda, aiming it at the very youngest. Another stage in the demonizing process, the next one, is creating the notion of a separate nationality, and you're doing that through legislation and by disenfranchising Jewish people. Now, this is done by way of the Nuremberg laws of 1935, super important, and they have a bunch of articles, and the first one codifies something that's already been happening by way of persecution by the Nazis organically, as you can see there in that picture from 1933, where this businessman and his Christian girlfriend have to carry signs about their improper relations because he's anyway. So Article 1 is that marriages between Jews and any other subjects of the state of Germany are forbidden, and that the state will annul anyone that gets married as of that moment, and retroactively can do that. Okay, so state prosecutors can annul those marriages and will. Article 2 is that extramarital relations in general are forbidden between Jews and Germans. And then 3 is that Jews may not employ in their households any female subjects under the age of 45, and that gets at the idea that's continually in that Der Stürmer rag that's getting the working class to hate, is that every Jew wants to impregnate a Gentile woman, that's their ambition to destroy the race. And in any case, you can't hire them, women of a certain age under 45. Article 4 is that Jews cannot pretend to be German. They cannot fly the Reich or national flag or display Reich colors, right? Which gets at that what we talked about already. So that disenfranchisement. Now this raises the problem, the definitional problem again. Who is a Jew as per the Nuremberg laws? If you're spelling out in law, you have to define who a Jew is. So a definition is hammered out in several months later in what becomes the second set of Nuremberg laws that adds the definition. And that's the Nazis define Jews as a person with 3 Jewish grandparents. That's a Jew. And a grandparent was Jewish. How do you define that? If they belong to a Jewish religious community. And that's what's really fascinating. That proves how this is all a lie, right? Because they end up defaulting to a religious cultural trait rather than a racial one, rather than blood, right? So the Nazis are defining Jews by their religion, Judaism, not by the racial traits that Nazism attributed to Jews in the first place. Next stage, much simpler, and that is Errichterung or Aryanization. And Aryanization is simply getting all the businesses that German Jews own out of their hands, right, through the carrot and the stick, but mostly through the stick. And eventually it becomes illegal for Jews to own businesses or to work in professions. And with that, and as the German army invades all these different nations, these Aryanization happens in each one of them. And what you get is a coterie of lawyers and insurance agents that are following the German army, literally making profit off of this transfer of a whole lot of wealth in Europe out of the hands of the Jews of Europe. And so they have to register their assets, and then we get an exit tax that's initially set at 25% of their assets. So if you want to get out of Germany, which is getting increasingly hard to do, you have to pony up 25% of your assets. Now the problem is these are based on pre-Aryanization calculations, and so to get 25% is very difficult when everyone in Germany knows that you have to sell everything, that you're under duress, right? So the value of what you own has plummeted. But yeah, that's Aryanization, getting businesses out of Jewish hands. Now this campaign was quite successful, and what it does is it gets the affluent Jews out of Germany, and you don't want them around anyway because you don't want your Albert Einsteins, your Marlene Dietrichs being seen as persecuted. You want them out of the country. It's not good for global spin, global image, right? So the wealthiest of Germany are able to get out. So in 1933, you've got over 500,000 Jews in Germany, which is about 1% of the population. By 1939, we're down to 190,000. And then as of 1941, and the whole Aryanization thing is preceded by these boycotts on Jewish businesses, and then by November 1941, all the property of those who have departed is now forfeited to the state. Now, interestingly, for the same reason that you don't want famous or affluent or both people being seen as persecuted, and when the Nazis are still afraid of or concerned about their global image, they set up this model area, the ghetto, a Jewish ghetto, in Czechoslovakia, in this medieval town called Theresienstadt. And this is really propaganda for the home front as well, propaganda for other Europeans and the globe. And the Red Cross is invited to come out here and tour, and they're given a good show. But what really it becomes very quickly is a transit camp for Auschwitz and Birkenau and all the rest. Now, a good example of one of these people is Freud's sister, Dolphy, or Esther Adeline. Adolphine, and she didn't marry. Typical story where one of the kids, often the youngest, stays with the parents to take care of them, and then they all end up in the concentration camp, as she did, transported from Vienna to Theresienstadt, and actually dies there in 1942 because Theresienstadt itself becomes a de facto death camp. Now, another stage in this whole othering and demonizing process is organized violence, and that is famous. Most have heard of Kristallnacht, right? November 1938, where for a few days, orchestrated from the very top, from Goebbels, there is violence against Jews in Germany and the burning of synagogues, and a massive historic loss, as pretty much every synagogue in Germany is torched, and thousands of Jews are put in the first concentration camps, and where a few hundred of them die, most of them are then later released. Now, what's interesting about the whole Kristallnacht is it backfires because it really tells the world that the Nazis are these thugs that they're pretending they're not, but it's also a waste of resources that the Reich is busy taking from Jews anyway. Okay? So it is not this plan. It's a temporary thing. It's a shot, a warning shot to the world. Most important for its legacy, not a strategy that they will continue to follow at that point. But yes, 20,000 young men are rounded up in Kristallnacht. 2,000 or so end up dying in Buchenwald, and the rest are released. But this is a really clear signal of what is to come. And again, Kristallnacht overall is a fail. And as Hermann Goering says, who was in charge of the German economy, he says in a meeting 3 days afterwards that, quote, "It's insane to burn a Jewish warehouse and then have a German insurance company make good the loss. I may as well burn the raw materials before they arrive." But you really see how in stages Jews become the problem that the Nazis say they are, and that problem only grows with success in war. When many of the Jews who managed to leave Germany, like the Frank family that we started with, they're now again under German control. And that begins with Poland. When Germany invades Poland, when 3.3 million Jews in Poland are again now under German control. And one solution, an immediate one for the larger centers, is ghettoization. Now, this is the Enternung, or displacement policy. And this is the idea of Reinhard Heydrich, and he is, we've introduced him before, this high-ranking SS officer under Himmler, chief of the Gestapo. Now, you probably have a sense of the ghettos. You might not know that there were this many, 1,100 established in Poland already by October of 1939. And these are managed by internally by Jewish councils, the Judenrat, that then report to the Nazis. And take this as a way to administer what is a chaotic situation in which many thousands of people are forced from their homes and put into tiny areas where scarcity becomes this omnipresent problem, and where people do start beginning to starve, which really begins the discussion or fast tracks that discussion for a better solution. Okay, but that is the Enternung policy, or the displacement policy initially. Now, concurrent with ghettoization is this other idea, which is really fascinating, and it's under Himmler, this idea of taking those Eastern Jews in Poland and German Jews and sending them to Madagascar in stages. Stage plan that would happen over 4 years, and this comes up. The specifics are laid out in the Eichmann report. Now, what's really fascinating about this to me, and of course Madagascar being a viable option because it is part of the Vichy regime, it's a French colony, and Vichy regime is under Germany, or supposed ally of Germany, but de facto controlled by Germany. Now, what's really fascinating to me about this is it speaks against the idea of intentionality, that the final solution was already planned decades before, because resettling millions of Jews on this island really speaks as strong evidence against that idea. But yeah, with the loss against the British in the Battle of Britain, this is no longer a viable option. Without control of the sea and without the Royal Navy, which was supposed to be part of this plan, because it would have been massive. In any case, so resettlement of European Jews to the eastern ghettos is what is happening instead. And now we get the resettlement of the Western countries of France, Belgium, Netherlands. They get sent as well to the eastern ghettos, and as well as Jews from Germany. And here, this is just to me a haunting picture of two young Jewish girls waiting for deportation from Munich. And yeah, it just really looking at these faces, it's just they having no clue what they're into. And the one young girl, smiling. It's just really haunting when you take it to that individual level. Now, Hitler's loss in the Battle of Britain is super important because it means the Madagascar solution is off the table. Another solution is needed because the Royal Navy will not be available for this. Every ship would be needed for this massive displacement of millions of people. In any case, that solution happens in the context of Barbarossa. So now we go from Entfernung, which is displacement, to Endlossen, which is the final solution. We don't have to belabor the general plan east, which we've talked about before, but just to say that it goes through 4 iterations. Eventually, that 60 million Slavs will be displaced for 8 to 10 million Germans. There are 10 to 25-year Germanization plans, which involve extermination through forced labor and expulsion to Siberia. What we haven't talked about yet is the Commissar Befehl. And this follows the invasion of Russia, and that is authorization from the highest levels, from Hitler himself, to treat any political commissar, so as well as anyone with Communist Party membership, really not a few of those in Russia, as fair game for execution. You can liquidate them all, as well as any Jews. So anyone who is thoroughly Bolshevized. And the key point there is complete absolution of responsibility for war crimes, which just initiates or unleashes this horrifying Holocaust that follows prior to the death camps in Poland. It's just a horrific time that it's indescribable. And here's just a few of the thousands of pictures, images that come out of that, many of which are documented by the Nazis themselves, by the action groups, and by Wehrmacht. Okay, so a couple good books on this that you might want to check out. Stephen Fritz, 2011, Krieg, Hitler's War in the East, and also Yale historian Timothy Snyder. About the same time, he wrote the book Bloodlands. Great title. And yeah, there's your suggestions for further reading on this. Here's an image of the process as I described it, of civilians in the ghetto being sent off to their death. Here's an image from the Western Ukraine from women from Nikos who are, have been stripped and now are waiting in line before their execution. If they have a child, they're told to hold their baby. And then they are lined up on the edge of a pit and shot once, topple into the ravine, and then the final coup de grace is administered if they are still alive. Now, the Nazi hierarchy quickly learns that there are two problems with this, and this process. One is that it is very time-consuming. Okay? It takes a lot of energy. Secondly, it is traumatic, and not for the target, the victim. It is traumatic for those who are charged with doing the executing, because murdering civilians day after day after day is going to do something to your psyche, and it does. It has a major impact of the morale of those in the East that are part of these action groups. And Himmler sees this firsthand when he tours one of these executions, and in fact is disgusted with what he sees. And this really begins the search for another solution, which becomes the final solution. Now, the other problem is the security risk, as more and more Jews in the ghettos are starting to starve, and they become more and more desperate. Interestingly, they break into two rebellious camps, and we have over 100 ghetto uprisings. There's a right-wing and a left-wing resistance. Fascinating. But yeah, over 100 ghetto uprisings, the worst being the Warsaw Uprising, in which 13,000 are killed by the Germans during it, and then 30,000 are deported, sent to their death afterwards. So this is a problem, and the Nazi government of occupied Poland specifically is saying that the only humane and the best option for security is to put them all to death. So that very spring, 4 main camps are built in Poland under a program administered by Eichmann. And that starts with Bergen-Belsen in March, Auschwitz in June, also Treblinka and Sobibor. All in Poland, but not Polish camps, as can still be mistakenly said. And the Polish government actually will wade in if this ever is said. They monitor for that because they are German death camps in Poland, not Polish death camps. In any case, summer 1942, the SS begins to empty the ghettos and transport Jews to the camps. Now, all of this hinges on the subterfuge that this is about evacuation, because there would be mass resistance and panic should the Jews really not just intuit, many of them, but definitively know what their fate is in the East. So to maintain that illusion that this is evacuation and not death camps, evacuees are allowed 100 pounds of luggage each, supposedly for the new life in the camps in the East. Of course, as soon as they get to their destination, those who are not gassed are put to slave labor. All of them lose their material possessions, and it's interesting that in Auschwitz, the barracks where their material is sorted is called Canada, because it's seen as a place of plenty. After working in these barracks for a time, those workers and then themselves put into the gas chambers. And it's just incredible. And to humanize this again, let's look at Else Uri. So she was Germany's most published children's author, kind of like A. Milne with Winnie the Pooh in the English world. And she stays behind to care for her aging mother in Berlin, and is one of the last to get deported to Auschwitz. That's January 1943. She arrives Sonderbehandlung, which means special treatment, That's the euphemism for special treatment for gassing people, and is murdered right away. So of the 1,000 people on her transport, 873 were judged unfit for work and put to death immediately, her among them. And the insanity of that is that most German mothers knew her books and had read them to their children when they were young, or German parents, and her stories survived the war. Her fate wasn't known until a student on a tour found her luggage among thousands of bags that were on display, and then her fate was finally known. Now, those who arrive and are selected for immediate execution to again prevent panic, they're told they're going to take a bath or a shower for disinfection and delousing, and that they would receive hot food and clean clothes right afterwards. They're told to strip and ordered to fold their clothes neatly, and they're told to remember where they put them so they can find them afterwards. As they enter the chamber, there are fake shower heads and there's drainage holes to maintain this illusion. Then the doors are closed, and at that point Zyklon B is dropped through a hole in the roof. Now this is mainly hydrogen cyanide that have been invented for pest control. And it usually takes about 3 to 5 minutes to take effect. So just brutal, and it could be worse. It could be more. It could be up to 30 minutes if it's very crowded. So worst case, 30 minutes of agony. Now, in other camps like Chelmno, they use carbon monoxide, which takes on average about 20 minutes. So just horrifying and hard to understand, hard to get one's head around. After that, these so-called Sonderkommandos, these undercommandos with gas masks on, would pull the bodies out and cremate them in these massive ovens, as well as an outdoor fire pit. Now, these Sonderkommandos, there's several units of them. They too are treated very well, and then they are also gassed. And rather than a book, a really good movie on this, but very difficult to watch, is The Gray Zone from 2001 by Tim Blake Nelson. Probably most tragic story in all of this was the Hungarian Jews, because of how long they were maintained in freedom by the proxy state of Hungary. They're not deported till 1944 when Germany takes over the administration. At that point, 350,000 are sent out by June. 250,000 of them are gassed in 46 days. And there's the first Hungarians arriving at Auschwitz on the first 2 trains on May the 2nd. Now, one of the survivors of that was the later famous author Eli Wiesel, who was a teenager at the time, and whose memoir about Auschwitz has been printed. It's 10 million printings, I believe, and is a must-read. Now, Auschwitz was not just a death camp. It's a series of 3 main camps, actually. Auschwitz I, Auschwitz II, which is Auschwitz-Birkenau, and then Auschwitz III, or Monowitz, which had dozens of corporate labor camps. And what happens here is those who are not selected for death are put to work for different German companies that are invited to come out here and lease prisoners for their production. It's incredible, and many of these companies still exist today. And in fact, it took a very, very long time, and decades actually, for them to pay any compensation for this. So decades of legal battle afterwards, resistance by all of them, and some landmarks individual lawsuits. Finally, a joint industry government fund was established in the year 2000 to pay compensation for the profits, the enormous profits made at Monowitz. And perhaps you know as well that IBM serviced the early computers for cataloging prisoners in Auschwitz. And yeah, much of this has come to light in recent times. One more point I want to give you, I want to end on this, and it's a fascinating story, and I really recommend these books, The Escape Artist or Escape from Auschwitz, about Rudolf Verba, who later settled in Vancouver. But while he's a Hungarian Jew who tries very hard, who escapes from Auschwitz, tries very hard to get the Jewish Council in Budapest to listen to him about stopping the deportation, or telling the Jews of Hungary what is about to happen to them. Fascinating story. He escapes more than once from Auschwitz and goes back in. I'm not going to tell you more than that, but a really great account if you want to know more about what happened here and what happens afterwards to those who resettle in Israel, where there's a lot of animosity towards that Jewish Council of Hungary for not being more proactive in warning those last several 100,000. Now, it's impossible to put any kind of positive spin on at the tail end of a lecture like this one. I hope I've historicized it well for you, though. Do know that the Nazis really believed that they were doing the world a favor, making the world Judenfrei. And perhaps the one encouraging thing we can get is that of the 11 million Jews in Germany at the war, almost half of them are still alive at the end. So Hitler never does accomplish what he set out to do. And in fact, Richard Overy gives as one of the 5 or 6 main reasons that the Allies won the war is the distraction of the extermination of Jews and others during the war by the Nazis, right? Which the moral loss was felt on the home front and factored into their loss in the overall war. In any case, lots to talk about here, lots more to drill into. There's so much you can do on this. As I said, the historiography on the Holocaust is massive. Okay, so thanks for listening. Any questions, please let me know.